Hey guys, this is Tyler here. It is getting close to the end of February, and I'm going to talk with everyone about the Balkan region and why I think it's an excellent place as a whole for MGTOW guys. The benefits it offers, and just why I think it's the very best region in Europe for guys to look at. So Balkans, of course, is a very underrated region as a whole, and it's not been until recent history that more people became aware of this area. It was, I think, very well advertised by the famous Andrew Henderson from Nomad Capitalist, and it's just a cool region. If we look at several of the countries like Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Kosovo, among other places, it's a relatively small region, but it contains several countries, and all of these countries obviously have unique characteristics and distinctions. Now, if we've look at the recent crisis that the world has gone through, we can pretty much see which countries have retained a lot of their liberty and freedom and ability to travel and move around. In the Balkan region is actually one of the few places in the world, and also for people from many countries to travel to and visit, or to live, whatever it is. And for me, it's really interesting because we can look at recent history. Many of these countries used to be part of the former Yugoslavia, which was a very famous authoritarian type of region, similar to the former Soviet Union. And obviously at that time, the liberties were much less, whereas now the pendulum's really swung the other direction. And it's very ironic because many people from former Yugoslavia left. They went to Western countries, to US, Canada, Western Europe, among other places, and they were looking for the same freedoms now that many people from places like US, Canada, England now are going to their countries to live for the exact same reason. It's very interesting how we see these trends in history. And it's also cool because the Balkans most of these countries aren't part of the federation like the European Union. They're actually mostly independent countries, autonomous countries. They're not part of a federation. And this is one of the main reasons why these countries, even with this recent crisis, have retained a lot of their liberties, and people can still come and visit these places and live. Whether it's Serbia, Albania, Montenegro, most of these countries are still open. And when we look at many of the European countries right now, they're actually closed. You cannot travel to if you're not a citizen of these respective countries, especially within the European Union. It's also cool too because due to the fact that these are very small countries, what we see is the very tiny countries tend to have a large population, especially younger population, that speaks English as a second language. And this is something you find in many of these places. You can find many English speakers, you can get by. I would also encourage people to learn the language of the country. I myself, because I'm moving to Serbia very soon, I'm kind of getting familiar with Serbian. I always think the best way to practice is on the ground, when you can be in the country, execute, and actually be in day-to-day life with people and corresponding and just listening to it. Always the best way to learn, but English at the end of the day can really get you by in many of these countries. If you don't speak the language, often for professional purposes and for getting things done, you can usually buy with English. There's, of course, some limitations. There's going to be some areas where it's not going to work. You may have to hire someone to be like a translator, interpreter, translate some documents, but in terms of just going about your day-to-day life, English often will work. Obviously, too, because when you look at these countries, take a language like Albanian. In Albania, which is right next to Serbia, Serbian, completely different language. These two languages quite different, even though these countries are very close by. People can't just freely correspond from one place to the next. It doesn't work. It's not like Ukraine and Russian. Ukraine, obviously, right next to Russia. Ukrainian and Russian, very similar languages, and also many Ukrainians by default also speak Russian because Ukraine was part of Russia. It was also part of the Soviet Union in recent history. This is not the case in the Balkan region. You can have two countries very close by, speak a completely different language. It's very interesting. And this is not very common in the world, this type of scenario. But because of this and the fact these are very small countries, English is the common language for people from neighboring countries so they can communicate with each other. And the other thing is like the prices of most of these places is very good. You can live a very good standard of living for a very reasonable price. Yes, there's going to be exceptions. So there's always going to be real expensive real estate, expensive parts of cities, but if you go through each of these Balkan countries to find somewhere to live and to go out to eat and just other expenditures, it's very good price compared to a lot of the other European countries and just countries worldwide. You're not going to find these kind of deals for living, to maintain a very good lifestyle. And this is something a lot of people obviously feel more and more squeezed, especially like in the US and Canada and England, many other countries. They have to have roommates, they have to live in very small apartments and not very safe parts of the city because they simply cannot afford decent real estate with the price of the rentals and their pay. It's just not possible. And especially if you're someone that's not making a typical income for these countries, you'll be able to probably really live in a comfortable place and possibly even purchase. Another big plus of the Balkans, this region, not all the countries, but many of them do allow foreigners to purchase real estate, even property in some cases. Like in Serbia, you can purchase both real estate, like apartment, house, property. There's 5,000 euro homes, small houses in the countryside of Serbia. It's really awesome, some of the deals and opportunities out there right now. And this is one of the big things of like the Balkan region. It's a developing market. It's not like completely developed like we'd see in the US or in Germany. And because of this, there's great arbitrage opportunities, and you can still get in on this. If you're a younger person and want to try make a name for yourself, this is definitely a region that you could do this. There's still a lot of opportunities among many of these countries out there. Another big plus too is that people don't frown upon wealth, and they're generally going to let you do your own thing. They're going to let people live and try make a life. This is unfortunate. In many countries, including the US right now, people don't like wealthy people. They don't like people that are successful. It's almost became a negative, in fact. And obviously tax rates have followed this because the same people then elect politicians that are very socialist and arguably communist also. And instead of electing politicians that want to keep low taxes and understand how the private enterprise is pivotal and crucial for providing jobs for people and for giving real wealth to a country. And many of the Balkan countries, they understand this, so people can live their lives, they can work, they won't be taxed out of the kazoo like in other places. You can, and this could also be like in property taxes. If we look at property taxes in places like US and Canada are just so ridiculously high nowadays in some places. Whereas like in the Balkan region overall, you look at many of the properties, big houses, apartments, you're not going to be paying very much in property tax. In some cases, nothing. It's so different. And this is just obviously one tax of many examples that one could give here. And this is one of the reasons people like in the US and Canada now often, there's kind of this expression about how you never really own your home, your house, even if you have outright paid the whole payment, because you always have that tax bill. And so if you have too many back taxes, the government and bank can essentially come in and take the house. They can seize the house, and it's just how the system's designed. You're always having these pretty hefty tax bills that you have to think about, and the taxes obviously extend to income tax and consumption tax and all sorts of different taxes. And it's just, I think, a place that's really not as encouraging and positive towards people that are working becoming successful and also really trying to provide jobs and helping those economies and countries, helping the systems over there. Another big impact of being in the Balkans, and this kind of goes back to earlier point that I made, is that because there's so many little countries in this area, you have several countries in a very small radius of the continent of Europe. You can experience all sorts of different cultures within the same day or a few days. You could go through all these countries, and there would be some similar aspects, but there's also great differences and variations from country to country. You could go from like Serbia to Croatia to Albania, Bulgaria. I mean, there's all sorts of differences in these smaller countries, and that's cool because, like I said before, European Union, we saw this especially several months ago. All these countries, even if you were from a EU country or citizen, you could not travel from one place to the next in most cases. Whereas like in the Balkans, you can go from country to country. One of the only countries is Croatia that's part of this federation, the EU. So most of these countries were accessible and are still, and you can experience the regional cultures and experience just different places. And this also ties into things like banking. If you want to establish like a redundancy, have multiple banks, personal, corporate banks, you can have like banks in three different countries in the Balkans. You could have like Serbian, Albanian, Montenegrin accounts, and it's cool because even though it's a small radius, it gives you this great diversity, and these obviously all different countries. And the same also could be done when it comes to like buying real estate or business or whatever it is, or obtaining a residency or citizenship. You could have multiple residencies in like 2 or 3 different countries in this region. It's really cool, actually. Another plus in the Balkan region is that the people still very much value their heritage, value their ancestry. And what that really means for these countries is that these countries will maintain most likely their status quo in the future. They'll maintain more homogenous populations and not nearly as like outgroup preference like we see in places like England or in France, which on the surface can seem really cool to some foreigners. When you look at the long-term effects and all the internal impact of this, it actually becomes very negative long-term when we look at countries that have experienced this, whereas the countries that have more tribal-minded, they're much more in-group preference, they preserve their heritage. These countries probably more reliable long-term because you kind of know what they're about. They're going to do their best to keep them primarily European-based countries, and that's obviously going to impact like the tax system, the crime rates, business climate, on many other aspects of the country. It's going to have an impact on many of these systems. Another big plus is just the geographic proximity. I kind of went over this before. These countries are obviously more in Southern Europe, and this also is close to Middle East. You're close to North Africa. You're obviously connected to the mainland continent of Europe. And this is really ideal if you're one that wants to travel, needs to travel. You're in a really ideal location of the world, and you can get to these places pretty quickly. I mean, we look at Turkey, for example, really cool country. Turkey is like a few hundred kilometers or 500 kilometers maybe for Istanbul from Serbia. And it's even closer when you look at a country like Bulgaria. It's these countries are close to like the Middle East region. And this is cool because if you're like where I am now, like in Estonia, it feels very far away, and it's a little more complicated if you want to travel to other continents. It's not so convenient, and this is really ideal. Also, these countries are very reliable if you're seeking citizenship, seeking long-term residency. If you have talents to bring, you have a business, you just want to study, these countries are very reliable. You live there, you spend time there, eventually you'll probably get some kind of residency and possibly a passport. There's been some actually bigger YouTubers that have recently obtained Serbian passports, and this is really important. There's other European countries not at all like this. can live there for many years and you'd still want to be a citizen. Middle Eastern countries, you could live there your whole life and never be a citizen. Or in Asia, and these are very meritocratic and fair countries in this sense. And if you're really seeking, whether it's a second base, a place to live long term, whatever it is, you need to look at places in a long-term mindset. It's not short-term, it's long-term. And do those countries follow the award? Do they execute on what they say they will do? And also, another big plus of these countries, when you look at the Balkans as a whole, they're on a good path. And they have different alliances from country to country. So if you prefer, like in a country that's more aligned with Russia, China, Serbia is a better option. If you prefer a more Western European, US, Albania is probably a better option. Other countries, probably a little more sovereign-minded. Maybe they have some partners, but maybe not real strong alliances. There's other Balkan countries there. You have options to choose from because some people, like Estonia, for example, very strong alliances with like the US, with Germany, England, Canada, Australia. Some people don't like this. They won't be in countries that have certain alliances because this can also have an impact on how the society is, the culture, the future of the country. Really cool thing about that region is that from country to country, there's probably a solution for you there. And the last thing is that these countries, they're very fun places to be. They're places that family and friends can probably travel to, would want to travel to, and maybe even live also. These countries just offer a pleasant place to visit and cool places to see. They cater to many different tastes. It's not like one kind of person. There's all types of people that can find a country in this region that works for them. They enjoy, whether it's to travel or to live. And these are all things of the Balkan region. Definitely a place to at least visit sometime if you have the time and the money. And give me your feedback below on this video. Thank you.